Hi, it's Jen DeTracy, and this is part 3 of my MS story for this year. As I mentioned in my last 2 videos, so I was diagnosed 9 years ago, 2010, and so that's quite a while ago. And I hadn't recorded my story around my journey, so now is the time to do it. And then this episode, what I said I'd talk about was just how I've been able to move forward in my life. The reality is, though, as Eckhart Tolle, the Power of Now author and speaker, talks about that in life we have up cycles and we have down cycles. Even with MS, you might feel like you're just going down, down, down. But in my life, I can say that I have definitely had up and down cycles. And I'd like to just go back to the beginning of the diagnosis. So I was diagnosed in the fall. It was September. I had just come back from a speaking tour and the left side of my body had stopped working. I ended up in the hospital intentionally, an emergency, and within 24 hours was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So quite fast, even though there was previous indications of something that was strange like vertigo, but there was no correlation at that point connected with MS, and it went away. So I forgot about it, sort of. So where I want to pick up in this journey, and I think this is a pivotal point, and I'm wondering if you can relate to this in some way in your own life, is in that really deep trough, the trough time, the painful, grief, horrible time before I started going to counseling to get support to turn my life around. And what happened for me was, as I mentioned in the last video, I was working in denial, grief, anger, all of that. I didn't mention that I ended a relationship that because I was struggling so much, I just couldn't really, I couldn't even function within myself to have energy for another person in my life in a close way. And being a fairly new relationship, I just, I couldn't manage it. And that in itself had its stresses, letting that go. But, at the time I realized that if I didn't focus on myself and take care of myself and love myself, I had nothing to give to anyone else. And other than my aging dog, who during that time I needed to put down to sleep because I just, because he needed to go, and he was sticking around for me, and God bless Jupiter for doing that. That was, he was a remarkable, beautiful animal that I loved so deeply. But I had to, at a certain point when he could barely walk himself and was falling down all the time, I had to let him go. And so when he left my life, and when I could barely get out of bed, and I thought that I would never be able to work again, and this is at this point about 5-6 months after being diagnosed and pushing in a place of denial, I was realizing that when I could almost not get out of bed, basically that at that point I was really not wanting to live. In fact, psychologically, this may sound strange. I'm wondering if you can relate to this, and if so, please write comments below, because I'm really curious. Psychologically, I felt I was dying. I mean, I knew physically I wasn't dying, but mentally I thought I'm dying. In a sense, it was a death. A new cycle of life trying to come about, as Eckhart Tolle would say, but I was in a down cycle, and I felt suicidal. I wanted to die. I thought, if this is my life, if the dishes are going to be stacked up and the laundry's going to be piled up and I can barely get out of bed, what's the point? I was at the peak of my career, and there I am in this place of sheer hopelessness, fear, everything. So what happened, I remember reading an article. We had, I was living at the time in Vancouver, British Columbia, beautiful city. And we have a weekly entertainment paper that came out called the Georgia Straight. And I opened it up and there was this article about this woman, can't remember her name offhand, but she had started blogging about her journey and her journey with Parkinson's. And she's young. She had a daughter who I believe was under 5 at the time, maybe even just like a toddler. I can't remember exactly. And she was, you know, a train wreck. I mean, imagine having Parkinson's in your 30s, right? A horrible thing to have to face, knowing that it's going to most likely get bad. And she had this fantasy about getting cancer so that she didn't have to go through that experience. Oh, just a sec here. I find that sometimes my throat struggles more since the MS, which is interesting. So I'm just having a little bit of hot tea to get that, just to smooth it out, Can make a big difference. So I was reading this article about this woman, and she was talking about, how she was wishing that she had cancer so that she would die faster because she didn't want to watch the journey of Parkinson's. And in some way I was like, yeah, you know, that's how I feel. It's like I want to die to take away the pain. And so I was having suicidal fantasies around dying because I really did not like my life situation. And I thought, projecting out, that it was just going to get worse and worse and worse and horrible and horrible and horrible. And I know, you know, and I didn't even really know much about MS at the time because I didn't even want to be connected with it. It just was too terrifying. I was afraid that if I knew more about it, that then what would happen is my life would get worse. So I wasn't going to support groups or doing anything in that regard. In fact, I was distancing myself as far as I could from MS. And just letting the thoughts, the clouds of darkness take over, like a huge storm coming in, but not necessarily leaving. And then I realized, wow, this was a pretty heavy place. And I started to ask myself the question of, well, if I was going to die, or if my life was going to end earlier, what was the one thing that I could do now that would breathe life into me, that I didn't want to look back at my life and regret not doing. And I, at that time, in order to come up with that answer, had also just had, in a sense, a little gift coming my way. And that was, and you may not know a lot about this, so I won't get too much into it, but basically, when I left, and I referred to this in my last video, I was in a 14-year relationship that was emotionally toxic to me, which I believe had an impact on my health in a huge way, and believe there could be very possibly some connection with MS. And Dr. Gabor Mate, who has written a book around health, he actually did research, and I think he interviewed about 12 women that lived with MS, and all of them had been in abusive relationships. So very, very interesting, and not to say that's the case for everyone, but really resonated with me. So there I was, and when I left that relationship, I decided to get some insurance for myself, because I thought, well, who's going to support me now? I mean, in that relationship, I was the primary supporter, but when I left, it's like, okay, well, who's going to emotionally support me, physically support me, if something happens to me? So I purchased critical illness insurance, which is like a lump sum of money that can come when you are diagnosed with something, with definitive proof, of course. And so I was in the process of receiving this chunk of money, and it really was a gift to take the edge off of my life situation. As a business owner, I couldn't get unemployment or disability insurance or anything, coverage. So it was a buffer for me. And I thought, okay, I'm going to publish a book, a business book. I'm going to take all of the blogs that I've written during the time that I wrote in my business over a 7-year period, and I am going to update them and consolidate them into a book, and I'm going to invest in myself. I'm going to hire a consultant to help me with this book. I'm going to hire a company to design this book and publish it. I'm going to hire an editor. I thought this is the gift to myself. So I shifted, some people use the word pivot. I pivoted from this place of total despair to a place of doing something in a heart-centered way. And let me tell you, this journey was not easy. I had a goal. I just kicked the camera stand. Did you notice that? I had a goal of publishing this book in a year. So editing all of the stories and remember, I'm living with like massive fatigue at this point, right? But the one thing I did was I slowed down my life and I reduced my work to a bare minimum to just a couple clients that I had. And so I had a lot more time. My contracts had ended. I had a lot more time to rest and take care of myself. And that's when I started to get into some of the healing steps that I took. So it wasn't just the book, but the book saved my life. In fact, having that critical illness insurance really gave me the latitude to invest in myself and to come to a place of saying, okay, I'm important. Even if my life feels like a train wreck right now and I'm crashing down, how can I empower myself? It's that cycle of life. I decided I didn't want to spend all my time down at the bottom, and I wanted to slowly work my way up. Now, during the time that I was working on the book, I had some really hardcore relapses. One to the point where I didn't have optic neuritis, which impacts the vision to the extent that I didn't go blind or have that physical pain that people can have in their eyes, which is excruciating. I didn't have that, but I had vertigo so bad that I couldn't leave my house. The colors of the lights outside, I believe that time of the year was, I think it was the spring or summer, and everything was vibrant and bright and beautiful, and I could not leave my house. I couldn't even go out for groceries, and I was single and living by myself. Very isolating time, and I basically over time could go out at nighttime, but then my depth perception was off, and as cars would drive, I was so afraid they were going to hit me, even if they were far away. It was terrifying. But the one thing I did at that time was, I must have somehow gotten myself to the library at some point, and I took out all these books on CD. It's a while ago, right? This is like now 2011. And I loaded them onto my iPod from my computer, and I would listen to them. And Philip Pullman, who did, now I can't remember the books he did, but they were kind of like Harry Potter kind of magical books. And there was a series of 3, and actually my daughter was into them when she was a kid. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to listen to those. I started listening to books that were geared towards children. Not that they're not good for adults too, but just taking myself into the fantasy world. And I would lay in bed or lay on the floor in my living room, and I would listen to those books because I really couldn't do much else. And that was it was like a really interesting time to be embracing this joy. I mean, I wasn't sleeping because I was so excited about listening. I would listen to these books for hours, right? I couldn't be on my computer or watch TV or do anything. I would just close my eyes and do this, and that was really wonderful. So on this journey that I thought would take a year to put together this book and publish it, self-publish, took 18 months. But it gave me something to focus on through the ups and the downs of the vertigo relapses that I was having, some more severe than others. And that was very helpful, because when you can have something that you love that's an anchor, it takes insanity and makes things sane again. And you know, like I said, that book saved my life. So that was a step in the right direction. I started to get counseling to deal with my emotions and I don't know if I would use the word hatred, but fear, grief, anger towards MS. And I was taught from a counselor that was Buddhist how to move towards it. In fact, it's interesting because many years ago I was in a program that many business owners and career-oriented people were in, and Andy Starkey used to say, he was the organization was called Pro Coach, would say the only thing that gets smaller when you move towards it is fear, because everything else gets bigger, right? Like if I come towards the camera, ooh, scary, I get bigger. But when we move toward fear, it shrinks. And so as I moved towards allowing and accepting the fact that I had fatigue and being more at peace with it and getting more into meditation, I even went away to silent retreats. I went away to this beautiful place on a beautiful island that wasn't that far from where I lived. It wasn't tropical or anything, but it was, green forest. And I had my own little room with my little desk. And there was a kitchen there. And I just slowed down my life. Because before I was diagnosed with MS, I was working 12-hour days and I was go, chocker block, go, go, go. Even though the fatigue was starting to ramp up, and then my body said, hey, we don't like this anymore. So the book was a pivotal moment, and I had a big celebration at a coffee shop where I read from the book, and I had the person, Norm Friend, that's actually his last name, who wrote the foreword to the book, and he came and introduced me, and I had friends there and business colleagues, and that was like, it was big. I mean, I don't read in public very often because I live with dyslexia, so I'm very conscious about reading. So I read, and it was just a wonderful celebration for me and a turning point. And so, yeah, I really started to focus on how can I take care of myself? How can I move forward in my life? How can I let go of the suffering emotionally, mentally that I'm having? And I made a pact with myself at that time that I would stay single and celibate and really focus on loving myself. And I would do things like buy myself flowers and put them on the fireplace mantle as a love for myself. And I would have like little date nights with myself, like make a nice dinner or watch a movie or something. I was very isolated. It was tough because most of my friends, for just circumstances in their life, they either disappeared completely or were angry at me in my craziness of dealing with my life. And let's say I did make some bad choices because, you know, I was struggling. I don't know if you can relate to that. Write your comments below. And so I just started to put a lot of love on myself. I did a lot of reading, personal development, listening to audio, and just trying to break through this pain. And at a certain point, I realized that living alone was not really serving me, particularly with having relapses and feeling isolated. So at that point, I decided that I would have a roommate. Now, in this situation of having a roommate, basically what I did was I moved out to almost to the country in with a friend who has an autoimmune disease. and lives with fatigue. So I felt like, okay, finally a person that will understand me and understand my situation. And she lived in a beautiful townhouse and needed a roommate, needed to fund her beautiful house. So there I went out to the country, and it was along a river, and I could walk along a path that was so beautiful. And it was just a lovely setting. I had my own bedroom, and then we shared the rest of the house, and I had a little place for my office space. And it was a way for me to reduce my expenses, have everyday human connection. And that was very, very healing for me. And it was almost 2 years, I would say, of being single before I met my sweetie. So life was unfolding intentionally for myself. It doesn't mean that I wasn't having times where I felt, you know, a little bit depressed or low at times. But I had a really good friend to hang out with and connect with and do things with. And my life slowed down because everywhere I went, other than walking the path by the river, I had to pretty much drive or ride my bike. I couldn't just pop out and walk down the street and get groceries like where I used to live. So it made me, it sort of pushed me towards a more sort of structural life, but also just I really needed to calm my nervous system. And over the next couple of years, I did silent retreats for 10 days and got support in a spiritual environment. And I just rebuilt back up my life slowly but surely, building up my confidence in myself because I really felt like it just diminished. So, you know, if you've got something in your life that you love, I know a lot of people just from the Facebook forums that I've read and different groups, you know, their animals are their spiritual retreat, right? Their connection with humanity, the joy, you know, that's so wonderful. And, or, you know, the other day, this woman on one of the Facebook groups, she did this beautiful drawing where she took a drawing of something else or an image that she copied, but she drew it freehand, and it was fantastic. She gave it to her daughter. All these people on Facebook wanted a copy of it, you know? So I think when we can find things in our life that are important or help us thrive. I saw another woman on Facebook. It was so funny, actually. She had posted a video, and at first it was like kind of weird because it showed a toilet. I'm like, why is she showing a toilet and then a shower? And then I realized it was like little, she was into miniatures, creating little miniature rooms and little miniature houses. And she had made that toilet and she had made that tub. And then there was little bottles of products, you know, cleaning products and soap and everything that she made. And then the camera went around. She did it from her mobile phone to a shower, like a stand-up shower, and she opened the door, and then there was like a sink with little drawers underneath with little towels, just towels, just spectacular. You know, just stepping into those things that we love. For some people, it's knitting. Gardening has been a real spiritual, uplifting activity for many women with MS, right? So depending on your ability physically, you know, and what you can do. And speaking of which, for myself, what was I going to say about that? You know, for me, just even doing these videos brings me a lot of joy. I know this video is getting a little long again, but it brings me so much joy because it's something that is a part of me. I used to do a lot of professional speaking, like speak at business events and share knowledge about my 5-step process in my book, which is called Live Strategies, Quick Tips to Engage Customers and Elevate Profits. I mean, that book, it's not like I sold thousands of copies of it. I did it to save my life. I did sell some copies along the way, and it's on Amazon and people can buy it. But it was like, wow, I don't really have the energy to go out there and actively market this book. This is not going to make me wealthy. I did it because I needed an anchor to save my life, right? That's why I did it. And the outcome of it is some people bought it. I gave lots of copies away. And it was an accomplishment for me that I feel very proud of. And it's like a pretty impressive business card, right? So that's what I did. And yeah, it's been an interesting journey. So I'll continue on to share my MS story again in the future. I just wanted to just hope that in sharing this with you, that you know that you can find ways to make your life better while living with MS. You can thrive. Maybe you're not going to thrive all the time. I know some days are pretty tough for me with fatigue and energy management and all that kind of stuff. But when I look at my life now, 9 years later, back to the beginning, way back to 9 years ago, I can say, yeah, yes, I'm not in denial anymore. I accept the fact that I live with MS. I accept the fact I live with fatigue. Do I get frustrated sometimes? Yeah. Do I push myself hard? Sometimes, yeah. And then I know I'm going to have a day or 2 or 3 days where I'm not going to feel good. And sometimes I'm just okay about that because I want to live my life. And so in that are going to be the peaks and the troughs. And I might not like it, but I'm okay about it. And I hope that you can share your strategies and successes down below in the comments around how you have been able to face and live with MS in such a way that you are living your life with those ups and downs. And with that being said, I just want to wrap up here. And the last thing I want to say is I have recently started a Facebook group for women called Women Living with MS and Fatigue, Women Living with MS and Fatigue. So if you'd like to join that private group, I encourage you to do so. I'm just kicking it off, so it'd be great to have you on board. I'd love that so much. It'd be fun. And we can be on the journey of connecting and discovering how to thrive with MS and fatigue together. That'd be great. So again, I'm Jenda Tracy, and this is part of my video series on YouTube called Life Beyond Fatigue. And what I mean by that is that we can live with fatigue, we can live with MS, and we can still have a life beyond that. All right, we'll see you again. Thanks so much for watching.